technology gives us that gift every day, right? To feel like we're exploring a new country and meeting new people, learn new languages, new codes in a very broad sense. I think that the perfect world is imperfect, and maybe we have to make more room for mistakes and for trying things out. And I believe that's true for the media, for other domains, and for individuals as well. What really caught my attention was the reception of ChatGPT. I would say that I acted as a stalker, almost, going through social media and seeing what people wrote about their experiences with ChatGPT. The technology itself was super interesting, but the reactions were, I don't know if they were more interesting, but really interesting to watch and to try to decode.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is another episode of Makes You Wonder. In case you got lost along the way, I'm Oskar. I'm the host of this project from Wondercraft, where I'm also the co-founder. And today I am very thrilled to welcome Chloé Sondervorst to the show. Chloé is a seasoned radio producer and digital culture advocate at CBC Radio Canada. She's based in Montreal, where she has dedicated over a decade to creating impactful programs, from leading Feu Vert, CBC's first program focused on environmental issues through a solutions-based approach, to exploring societal changes in le genre humain. Chloé is passionate about telling stories that resonate deeply with audiences. In her commitment to promoting responsible dialogue around AI and new technologies, especially among younger generations, makes her a very unique voice in today's digital landscape, and we find her very cool and fun. She's a very creative person, so you really need to go in and follow her on social media to see what she's up to. And beyond her role at CBC, Chloé has also co-hosted international events on AI and culture, produced multi-platform series on digital life, and advocates for diversity in and inclusivity in media. And she's also an active figure in civic media, co-authoring 30 ans de radio citoyenne, which explores the legacy of Montreal's community radio. I am butchering French here because I'm really trying to impress Chloé. I guess she speaks perfect French, obviously, and English, and it's amazing to have her on. But go follow her on social media, if nothing else, to brush up on your French, as I need to do, because this is wonderful. And this is Makes You Wonder with Chloé Sondervorst. Chloé, welcome to Makes You Wonder.
It's a pleasure to be here, Oskar. Thank you.
And happy Friday. We're shooting this on a Friday. It's a very sunny day here in Hoboken, New Jersey. Tell everyone where you are and what is the weather like? Because I'm Swedish, we talk about the weather a lot.
We do that in Belgium as well, because it tends to be rainy. But actually, I'm in the Montreal area, and it's a sunny day as well. Yeah, to end this particular week, I would say.
It's been a particular week. We talked about it before we hit recording here. That's certainly an election week in the U.S. that left everyone a little jarred, perhaps.
Yeah, and as your neighbors in Canada, we feel the impact of that election as well.
Yes, of course. I think the whole world does. And maybe I'll see you up there. We might drive up there and stay in Canada. I mean, that's
we welcome you with open arms at any time.
Chloé, it's so great to have you. And again, we were talking about this before we started recording as well. You bring a very cool perspective on this. We've been following you on the social media. You're big on TikTok, and you have this quite unique voice on the subject that we love to talk about here at What Makes You Wonder, which is, the human relationship to artificial intelligence and digital media. And we love so much the voice that you have, specifically speaking to younger generations about that, which is obviously something that you can be endlessly curious about, how technology evolves and how it's adopted by the younger generations. So we're going to get into all of that today on the show. But let's start from the beginning a little bit. I'm curious to learn more about you. Obviously, you've built a fascinating career in radio and digital media, and you have a very unique voice, as I mentioned. How did you get started with, becoming a social media star on the subject of of technology for the younger generations.
Well, you're too generous, Oskar. But I love using TikTok as a platform to communicate and have conversations with the public. I work for a public media broadcaster in Canada, which is CBC Radio Canada. But I think it's interesting to use every tools we have to create these connections with our audience. And you mentioned human and technology. And I'm really interested in the intersection of these two fields. I have a background in philosophy. I studied philosophy and East Asian studies. So I love traveling. I love discovering new perspectives. And I think technology gives us that gift every day, right? To feel like we're exploring a new country and meeting new people, learn new languages, new codes in a very broad sense. And so, when, about 2 years ago, when ChatGPT came out, as a lot of people, I was really curious in, trying to understand the impacts, that piece of news, let's say, would have on our society. And I began to use TikTok, which I already use for technology, news, digital culture in a broader sense, to explore AI and generative AI in particular. So I produced a couple of videos, vertical videos about ChatGPT and other generative tools, and they got a lot of traction. And, I do that in French, obviously, as you may have guessed with my accent. And I believe there was, and there still is, a big need for discussions about technology and AI in a very open way. So that's part of the answer.
Did anything specifically influence you to start this kind of creative journey in this way of storytelling?
Yeah, I think I come from the radio world. And so voice, I think, is a really powerful medium to connect with the audience, because it's at the same time so simple and so immersive. When you produce a radio show or a podcast, as you do right now, you really go into the daily life, even I would say the intimate lives of the people you're talking to. And so that was a big reason to, explore that medium, trying to see how it can be useful to explore these topics, technology and digital culture.
With your background in philosophy, how do you integrate your philosophical thinking into your approach to media production or the topics that you explore? Does it give you a unique perspective on these topics, you think?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of my entry point. And, I love traveling in time and philosophy is a great way to do that. And if you go back to the antique Greek philosophers, Socrates obviously was a very important figure. And one of his main motto was, the power of discussion, like the dialectic method. Acknowledge that you don't know what you believe you know. Ask questions, engage in conversation with people around you, and engage in a way in conversation with yourself. Question your own beliefs, question who you think you are, and try to figure it out. And that's pretty close to the journalistic, kind of way to do things. Ask questions. Don't take things for granted. And in a way, journalism gives me a good excuse to be curious and to ask questions about people all around the world, about AI technology and other topics as well. And I think in a period where there is so much, innovation and rapid development of the technology, we have to get back to the basics, to try to figure out things, find our own way, find what makes sense to us as individuals and as a society through these tremendous changes. So asking questions, and from there, getting to values, ethics, to me is an important referral point.
It's so clear that you had this big philosophy background and studying that for years. When did you know journalism was your career path forward and telling stories in various ways? Was there a specific moment you go back to and like that's what I want to pursue?
Yeah, totally. Because, I spent quite a few years, maybe too many years studying philosophy and then East Asian studies. I studied in Japan and China and I really enjoyed it. But, at a certain point, I was like, either I pursue my studies and move, do a PhD and so on, or find a different way to continue, that I would say that path of curiosity. And I remember, trying to figuring things out and asking myself, like, what did I really enjoy as a child? Because, I believe our childhood isn't like a defining period of our lives. There are things that we really enjoy. And to me, it was music, horse riding, but I didn't want to choose that as a career path. But I remember creating like totally fake radio programs. Like I would sit with a friend in front of like an old tape recorder. I was born in the 80s, so we used these vintage tapes to create Phil's Olympics review, with a small like a small pool, and we would use our hands to create movement in the water and pretend they were swimmers and comment on that. And I remember enjoying creating these audio environments, immersive stories as a child. And I was like, maybe there's something to explore there. And at that time, I was studying at McGill University in Montreal, and they have a student radio station, CKUT. So I went there and started participating into programs. And, I had a lot of fun, and they suggested that I tried another community station in Montreal, CIBL, which is a very important Francophone community radio station in town. And I had a great time over there as a intern journalist. They opened a producer, like a new position. And, I was chosen. So that was my first official job in a radio station. And I didn't leave the field since that moment. And I always felt it was, it made sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that story. It's great to go back to your childhood and ask yourself, what was really something that caught my attention? Also, now I can't stop thinking about a career path in horse riding and music. Yeah. I think that's some sort of, feels like country music perhaps would be a genre to step into. I don't know. Fantastic. Maybe. Also, student radio. I love that. I did student radio back in the day. No one offered me a paid job after that. But I really enjoyed doing it. I don't even know.
A podcast host now. So.
Yeah, exactly. I come full circle. That was actually a joke when we started this. I'm like, I'm famous for my student radio show. It was called Cash Cow, and it was running on I studied at Uppsala in Sweden, which is old, beautiful university. It's a big one too. It's like 50,000 students. And I had this radio show with a couple of friends, but we had so much fun. I think that's also where because I've had a long love affair with audio as well. And Wondercraft is obviously an audio production platform. So we're kind of coming full circle now with this podcast as well. But I think that's where I really started loving audio. But back to you. I mean, it sounds like a fantastic start of a great career. And it feels like you've kind of transitioned from journalism a little bit to producing more original programs with CBC and Radio Canada. What was that shift like? Was that also something that just kind of appeared as an opportunity in front of you? And how did that just kind of shape your perspective on media coming from journalism and then kind of creating your own formats, if you will?
Yeah, so when I joined Radio Canada, I was a radio journalist. They have that open contest for new journalists. You have to pass general knowledge tests, translation tests, and so on. It's quite stressful. But then I got in and started working on the radio news programs. And quite soon after that, I had the opportunity to work as a producer, but for like public affairs and news. And that was a really formative period because, journalism is built on values, on guardrails, guidelines, and they all have a very useful purpose, which is to maintain the trust with the audience and to make sure that when you produce a radio special, you do it in a very responsible way. So I worked there for a couple of years and really appreciate that experience. But after a while, maybe it's the country music, horse riding, music vibe, that caught on. And I wanted to explore a bit of a more creative field. And as you mentioned, create my own programs, get back to the cultural scene. And so I moved on to a different sector within Radio Canada, which is, by the way, a huge corporation. We have, stations across the country, thousands of employees. So there are a lot of opportunities to progress and try different things throughout your career. So I moved to what we call the national programs on the radio, and I had the opportunity to create new offerings. And, something that was always present is try to bring new voices to the radio, new artists, new talents. It's important to connect with established personalities and to discover them with their new projects and new aspects of, their work. But the public space, I think, is like an ecosystem, and you have to take care of, maintain a good biodiversity with the voices. So maybe that's like a common theme throughout the projects I developed, bringing new voices, using the platforms to make them resonate and connect with the audience.
And I mean, you work on some huge project over there that I find fascinating. Let's see if I can not butcher the French here. I should be better at French. Feu vert.
Oh, that's good.
Feu vert. Feu vert and le genre humain.
Very good.
All right. Okay, thank you. I practiced a little bit before the recording. I used to live in France. This is 20 years ago. I am quite old.
Where in France? I'm curious.
On the sea, actually, just south of the Swiss border. I'm a big skier, so I lived there for a while, and then
Amazing.
I was a ski bum in Chamonix. What is the day-to-day look like? It feels like you're so productive in all the media you're creating. What is the secret behind your creativity, and how you find what kind of tools, what kind of systems are you running to structure your days to create all this content?
I don't know if that's a good answer, but I would say intuition. You can prioritize using calendar. There are plenty of amazing tools out there, but I feel that after a couple of years, you kind of develop an internal sense of what's really important. And I really try to stay connected with my internal compass. And, from there decide, where should my energy go? How should I allocate the time I have? I wouldn't pretend it's always working, perfectly. But I try to do it that way, and I try to keep it fun as well. And I think it's, everything is it's much more easy when you enjoy doing it. And I know it's not always possible. And of course, there are hard times as well. And there are, sometimes a lot of pressure. But as for myself and the team I'm working with, I try as much as I can to make it fun and enjoyable. And again, that's easier if you're connected to your mission and your purpose. Why are we doing this? Why is it worth our efforts? So Feu Vert is a daily program about the environment. And, that could be a very hard and depressing topic. But again, we try to make it fun. We use the approach of what we call solution journalism. So showing what's happening out there, what are the solutions people try to develop to answer these huge challenges. And again, bringing new voices to our platform, and carefully choosing the music, like mostly broadcast new artists, local artists, and you create like a mood. I would say maybe a vibe when you produce a show, and everything is important. The people you work with, the sound environment, the topics, of course. And so when everything is aligned, it runs almost like a breeze, I would say, even though there are challenges. So maybe that's part of the approach there. And further is only a part of the pie. Like I also have a lot of projects in AI, and, I'm a contributor to daily news shows. So besides intuition, yes, it takes an amount of organization.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So intuition, that sounds like secret sauce. Like it's just something you have. Sounds like pure talent, really. But there is a system to the creation. But I'm assuming, like, with this value system that you have, that intuition drives you to the stories that you want to create, and that kind of brings you forward in that production. Is what I'm hearing. Does that sound right? Is that what intuition is?
Yeah, and you have to listen a lot, I think. And when you work in the media, there are so many stories every day, coming in the news, like threads, either on social networks, on other media platforms. With every conversation you have, like, I'm always in a kind of stories recruiting mode. When I talk to a neighbor, that could become a story somehow. And there again, you have to prioritize, what stories should we pursue. And I think for that, you have to listen to your, like, internal feelings, but also try to listen to the public, and, what is not enough covered, what kind of information maybe are missing in the public space. So at the same time, you have to be connected to your own intuition, and also be really honest about your own shortcomings, and try to find ways to hear the signals.
That makes sense. It
I'm sure you do
sounds easy when you're saying it, but it's
no, but I'm sure you do the same thing as an entrepreneur, right? You have to sense what's going on and see how you adapt your strategies.
Yeah, it's very accurate. I think that goes for, it goes for everyone, right? I always envision this: when I wake up in the morning, I have 10 energy coins I have to spend on my attention on, and trying to be wise about how I portion them out, and then look at what is the most important here. What can I really figure out? Because I sense that it's easy to burn out or to lose creativity when you're running out of steam, and really have an impact on what you're trying to achieve.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's really important to be intentional about what we do with our attention. We're so bombarded by different things throughout the day. And I remember hearing Brian Eno saying that he used to wake up, have breakfast and read the news. And he decided to change his routine, and not reading any news pieces, not any emails, even not eating before noon, to have this fresh, even pure beginning of the day. And in a way that makes sense. And I remember also him saying that, he was hungry at the end of the morning, with this really unique sense of humor. So yeah, I think it's good to be intentional and try different routines and so forth. And at the same time, sometimes I have that very terrible beginning of the day, and I really feel like I'm losing my time, whatever I do. But then through all that mess, there's something that rises, and that's totally makes sense. That's the serendipity part of it. And yeah, sometimes you cannot anticipate these moments, but they finally make sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. First of all, Brian Eno, I love Brian Eno. It's kind of work music for me. His ambient tracks. No, this fascinates me endlessly. I think about this every day. I try to have these routines at night too, because we are bombarded with so many things. That's such a cliche, right? But it's so true. It's so easy to get sucked into all these channels and all this abundance of content that were just thrown at us. And there's so much interesting things there now, including AI, which I now want to dive into fully with you. I can just sit with ChatGPT and ask questions, silly questions that I'm wondering about, and read up on that. So it's almost like AI has become a very specific new media channel as well. So it's endless. So we have a policy now at home that have a no phone sign in our bedroom, and trying to just cut out technology as much as I can in certain parts of the day, because otherwise your brain just can't keep up with the constant bombardment. I think that's part. Even having the phone in my bedroom, you can almost feel it, that it's there.
Yeah, it's like a companion. You
Right.
have to admit it, right?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of sad, but that's where we are now. Anyway, Chloe, I want to dive into AI. You're obviously talking about that quite a lot, and you have a strong interest in emerging technologies and AI. What drew you to explore digital culture and artificial intelligence in your work? And I realize that AI is a very, very broad subject, but you dive into it so well in your videos and in your speaking engagements that you have at CBC. How did you get started with that? What drew you into it?
Yeah, maybe I will go back to my childhood again.
Yeah.
I remember like my father was a real geek, and he bought like one of the first personal computers and just let it in this office at our home. And, it wasn't like the computer was there for me to use, and I used it a lot to try like different things. I remember the first like floppy disks and so on, like the adventure games. And I really remember enjoying, I would say using the computer as a companion, as, a kind of device, that can use to explore new worlds. And I know it's so general, but like these old school video games were to me super immersive, even though if you look at them today, they're, obviously very limited. But to me, it's fascinating to see how that kind of device can like make your brain cells like sparkle and create new connections. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And when I became a journalist, I, was myself the geek of the teams I worked with. Like when the social networks became an important part of our daily lives, I was really interested and curious in seeing how can we, as legacy media with the radio, the television, the print, and even the internet, explore these new spaces. So that's kind of, the same dynamic that with the old vintage computers. And one of the first project I worked on was called Bienvenue chez les Numéricains. So in English, it would be something like welcome to the digitalers, like if the digital world was a country. And it was a kind of this American life, but with digital culture. So we looked for stories, human stories across Canada of people whose lives have been changed by technology. And that was a couple of years ago. So at that point, meeting your spouse on Facebook was something original. And, today it's so
Right.
common. It wouldn't be a story.
It's like the rule today, I feel like.
Yeah, any app, right? But at that point, we had to do a research to find people, who had that experience and were ready to talk about it. Or, the first teachers who tried to use iPads in the classrooms, the first drone pilots, and so on. And it was so fascinating to hear these stories and create a program with that. So as the years went on, I worked on other projects merging technology and human stories. And obviously, AI gives us a lot of opportunities to explore that field.
I mean, it's spiraling a lot, right? But you, like everyone else, you've seen a ton of all these new emerging technologies the past 20 years. I mean, we've gone through, the early days of blogging when that was a thing, and then the iPhone came, and then user generated content, and the social media, the influencers, and now AI. Do you remember the first kind of encounter you had with, I guess, generative AI? I think AI has been around for a while, but the biggest, did you have a bit of an aha moment, or a wow moment rather, that you remember stepping into AI?
Yeah, what really caught my attention was the reception of ChatGPT, because, as we all know, the technology wasn't new at that point. But it's the way they, designed that chatbot and released it to the public, that really created that new spark of attention. And I remember at that point that even OpenAI itself was surprised by the the attention, and all the reactions to ChatGPT, like the servers were, in overload. And I was really curious, and I would say that I acted as a stalker almost, going through social media and seeing what people wrote about their experiences with ChatGPT. And actually, that's one of the first TikTok I produced at that time. Is like I built like a categorization of the different reactions to ChatGPT, because from that moment you could see the different camps, or the different sides, of the story emerging, people who were really interested in seeing the opportunities. How can you use that technology? What can you do with it? People who were trying to see the defaults, the problems, make ChatGPT say absurd things. People who saw what you could do to facilitate your daily work, encounters, so on. So the technology itself was super interesting, but the reactions were, I don't know if they were more interesting, but really interesting to watch and to try to decode.
I think that says a lot about you, how you you experienced this, what I consider being a very jaw-dropping moment in technology. I think the previous time I felt that was the first time I tested Spotify back in like 2008, and I thought that all the music, this is amazing. And I had the same kind of jaw-dropping experience when I tried ChatGPT. But you saw it, but then you turned to the users instead and looked at how people were actually interacting with it, or how they reacted to it. I think that kind of says a lot about that intuition that you have as a journalist to find stories in things.
Yeah, try to listen to what's going on, And at the same time, I had, it was so great to experience these tools myself. And I spent a lot of time testing ChatGPT and then the other tools that came out pretty quickly. I remember, Bing /Sydney before. I don't know if you remember that chapter. Yeah, it was amazing to.
Was that the one that turned really racist after a while? No, that was something else.
That was I forgot.
Microsoft.
It's for Microsoft as well. It was on Twitter at the time.
Oh, yeah,
but right. Bing was the first iteration of Microsoft Gen AI chatbot, and I was in the beta users, and they were, it was, you could say, unleashed. Before, maybe you remember that famous article from the New York Times, Kevin Roose, tried to had that very weird interaction where the chatbot, quote unquote, tried to convince him to leave his wife for her. And so, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I know there are plenty of, things to discuss in that story, but I remember interacting with a chatbot before it was more constrained. And it was really interesting to see where it was going and the kind of persona it was it was playing. I'm sorry for this weird English sentence. I hope this makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, spending a lot of time experimenting with these tools is a real, I would say, a pleasure, even though we have to be careful and we have to think about the environmental impacts and so on. But I think it's fun, it's interesting to do, and it gives us a better understanding of the technology and, both its potential and limits as well. Curiosity maybe is a great way to enter that field. And I think it's true for the public and for the observers as well.
Looking at how you have observed how people are adopting to these new technologies, even from the beginning, how have you seen, these audiences, their attitudes have changed towards AI over the course of the past couple of years? Is the adoption kind of landing with people, and is it here to stay? Where, according to you, are we in our attitudes towards AI?
That's a very big question because, the hype cycle has been going on, and I think we're still in it somehow. You've probably seen these drawings of the Gartner hype cycle and so on, and people trying to to point, the exact place on the court, on the line we're in. I like Amy Webb's perspective on that. Like she said, we're maybe entering in a different kind of time frame, defined by transition and somehow acceleration. Like maybe we're moving to a state of permanent change somehow. So should we define things in terms of hype cycle, or maybe are we trying to understand better the technology, improve it? But we will always be in that process, and I'm not sure there will be a plateau and then a fall and then another rise, because it's obviously evolving so fast, and every time we answer a question, there's another one that arises. So I guess we have to figure out ways to ride that permanent and ongoing wave. And I know that's not a very defined answer, but maybe there's something of that going on nowadays. But but obviously there is a lot of anxiety among the population when we talk about AI, and maybe there's a schism between the industry and the people who develop the technology and the main population. And because fear is really present, it's really there. I think the media plays a role there also in defining the discussions in a way, even though the communication is much more distributed today. It's really distributed today between the legacy media, the social media platforms, and so on. But there's a maybe mainstream discourse about the risks of AI, which is relevant, but which doesn't cover the whole picture. And so how can we bring bridges between people who develop AI, the main audience, the researchers? I think there are a lot of things that we share, but sometimes, those are really, it's a polarized world. That's a cliche as well.
No, but it's obviously a very big question. I think it's interesting to just look at it from different vantage points. I think, when the big AI models are talking, they're always talking about the future. They're selling the idea of what they're doing, and that's influencing media in a certain way to maybe try to see the negative outcomes of it, and maybe that takes a spin sometimes. There's obviously great positive stories out there of AI being used in research in medicine or in in the medical field or in health tech that are fascinating. So there's so many nuances of AI, but I feel like there's also a question about what the actual application would be in different areas of business and where it actually helps us out. And then obviously job displacements would always be a discussion that comes up every now and then in different areas as well. But like focusing on, you speak a lot to a younger generation. How are they approaching, when you interact with them, how are they approaching AI in for education and school? I've seen videos of you talking about how, there was this wave of obviously AI being used in schools for school reports, etc. And then you try to combat that with systems that identifies that it is actually written by AI, and now we overcome that. There's this constant struggle of use of AI in different ways. But talk a little bit about if you want to zoom in a little bit on the younger generation who are growing up with this, who are in school now. What's your concern and what's your optimism, if there is any, around their use and how they're growing up with AI?
So the last couple of weeks, we have been developing AI workshops for teenagers and students. So it's really like AI literacy activities, let's say, like 2-hour sessions that we do in public libraries. And we try to create that space for experimenting AI tools and also reflecting on the technology. And so you see the philosophical side of things coming up here. And I also do interviews with the participants for a coming radio program about AI and the new generation. And they're super curious about the technology. But you said earlier that AI is a really broad term, and that's something that I really noticed in these activities. It's like, what is AI? Like AI, a cell phone, social networks, like everything is a bit mixed up, I think, in their experience. And in a way that makes sense. It's probably the same thing for adults. We have these really dramatic discussions about AI because of these generative tools, but AI has been part of our daily lives for so many years now. Every time we use Google Maps or Spotify, like there are so many applications out there. So what I try to do is to get a little bit more specific, like discuss more precise use cases. And that changes the conversation. Like, for example, in Quebec, there has been an interesting case about AI and culture for an upcoming book festival. Like the organizer hired in like an agency to produce the visual for that festival, and some members of the audience noticed that that visual seemed to be AI generated, and there were obvious mistakes, like the classic missing finger, things like that. So, of 4,
Yeah.
And so that created like a commotion. The festival investigated and learned that AI was used and apologized and like crafted a new policy and so on. And so I discussed that example with one of the group, but I also showed them the cover of the Elle magazine in France, which was created in partnership with Google for the release of their new mobile phone, and an AI creative agency, Detroit, that only worked with AI talents. But they have like a model, a photographer, makeup artist, and so on. And then they used generative models to create a unique aesthetic signature. And so you have two very different examples of the use of AI for an artistic project. And I think from that point, you can have much more meaningful conversation, either with the youth or with the adults, about what is AI, what are, what you can do with it. That, starting with very large question, or, can you be creative when you use AI? Because it gets to how you use it and why you use it.
You articulated that so well, because I think that somewhere around there is where the fear comes in. 'Cause I think the people who have not played around that much with AI, they consider it being just a magic button that is going to replace my own mind and my creativity, and I pushed a button and the perfect art is coming out and I'm no longer needed. When you work with, like you say, AI artists, or people who speak to a lot of film producers who use AI, and AI specialized agencies who are using it as a creative tool. But again, the people behind the scenes there are, like you said, well-trained photographers. They know what they're looking for. They know they use it as another way of, it's a new Photoshop for them, right? It's a new tool to come up with the visual and the vision that they have, and then they can manipulate it in different ways. And the same thing we're doing with Wondercraft. We have this stance on bringing it in as a tool, the human creativity in there. Without human creativity, there's nothing you can really do. There's no magic button, but there are extremely helpful tools to make sure that the visual, or the sonic colors, if you will, are there. Like, you're dressing up your audio in the right way. And the same you can do with now with the film models that are coming out, and obviously the visual models are already quite prevalent. And I find that fascinating that the the industry is really picking up this as a creative tool, and it's not scary for them. And the same thing, I went to I always tell this story, and I'm still blanking on the producer's name, but there was a producer that was at Brand Week in Phoenix, and he is an 18-year-old music producer, and he uses AI in the studio all the time to come up with things. And it was the most natural part of him, but it was just a source of inspiration and a way to just, be curious about, expanding his horizon creatively, and then build on that. Right. So I liked how you put it as the two very different sides of a view of AI.
Yeah, and it's great to see how, as a tool, it can be used to explore new grounds. We talked about Brian Eno earlier. Maybe you've heard of the new documentary about his life and work. It's actually the first documentary about Brian Eno, because he always refused to participate in that kind of endeavor. He found it too rigid and so on. And so the documentary is a generative documentary. The director, Gary Hurstwith, used a generative model to create like a different rendering of the story every time the documentary is projected. So they have like 500 hours of material, and every session is like a unique experience. And I love to think about how AI can also be used to create like togetherness, like new common experiences, because we often tend to think about technology as something that, tears us apart, that create these bubbles that isolate us. But in that case, I attended one of the projection in Montreal, and it was amazing to see like the crowd cheering at some of the moment of the documentary, and the director was there to explain his, vision and process. And it is great to see these live experiments and live experiences, be created with AI in a very creative way.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And I think that also brings us to the point where those stories come up to the surface a lot more than just the scary AI is a magic button that's going to take your creative job from you. Because I see a lot more, there's a lot of AI video artists out there now. They're experimenting with models, but they put so much time and effort into it. And you really have to be a professional to even go through those things, right? There's no magic buttons anywhere. and they do post-production and make it work. I haven't heard of the Brian Eno documentary.
Try to see it. I think it's definitely worth it. It's a great example. And, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that, AI slop is a reality as well. And
totally.
there is some laziness out there, but then I guess we are responsible from our own shortcomings. But then, there's a systemic aspect as well. But on that front, I think it's interesting to see also how like major players are positioning themselves with AI. Like when you look at someone like Universal, obviously it was managed like huge intellectual properties and so on. And, on one hand, they sue some AI companies like Suno and Udio for the use and protect the unauthorized use of, AI works. But they also recently released, maybe you've seen that, you know that song Rocking Around the Christmas Tree? Like the classic, it's from, I believe, 1958. And the singer at that time, Brenda Lee, was 13 years old. And they just released a Spanish version with her own like teenage voice. So, even these huge players are experimenting with different ways to use AI, obviously make money, but also like, support a creative vision and, the contribution an artist can make to society. So it's really it's really nuanced, I believe.
It's interesting, right? I think Timbaland was also starting to be involved in Suno and releasing stuff there. I have background in music as well from Spotify, and there's a few companies I work with that are approaching this in a very ethical way, meaning the training data is all ethical, but they are labels are very interested in branching out their existing content, so they just want to control it, right? So if they have the IP for a song, to be able to create multiple variations across different genres, AI can be very helpful there in just creating variations that could hit new target audiences and branch out. So I think we'll see a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think we're just at the beginning of this discussion about ethical training and, new models of licensing. Maybe you've heard of Ed Newton-Rex initiative for ethical training. So we have to be creative about the solutions also themselves.
Talk about the future of AI and where we are now. I think we've kind of established that we're in this kind of transition phase, or if it's some sort of permanent transition, as you mentioned before, which is, I think, is quite telling because we don't really know. And every week there's something else new coming out that really makes our jaw drop, right? In terms of journalism and the storytelling there and where you are in public media in Canada, how do you view AI as a tool for journalism, and how would that play a part in not only generative AI, but in general? What is the future of AI within journalism and how we tell stories and report on events to the public?
Yeah, I believe there are plenty of opportunities. Like as a public media broadcaster, our mission is to serve public interests. So how can AI first help us better understanding what the public really needs? Because sometimes you decide the day's priorities in a closed editorial room and, we have tools and so forth, but can we explore new tools to get a better sense of what does the public need? That's just one direction. But to give you a concrete example, Skipsted in, Norway realized that, the young readers were basically missing in action. Like they were not interested in reading their articles anymore. And so they had a problem, and they used large language models to create short summaries of news article, like bullet point summaries, and just add them on the top of article on their website. And, it was really public oriented as an experiment. And it proved right. It proved useful for that younger audience. And the results was that people in the end read more of the articles. So how can AI, facilitate that connection between news and the public? I think it's a great question. Sometimes AI can be used as a commodity just to do what we already do, like faster, and make it less expensive, and that has obvious advantages. But I like to be a little more ambitious and to try to explore new ways. And the answers aren't there to pick, but the questions maybe are as important as the solutions. It's like, why do we want to use AI? And sometimes even going back to that question is hard because things are moving so fast and there's a kind of pressure on many news organizations to just adapt AI, right? You have to train your workforce. You have to stay, relevant and so on. But the why question is maybe one of the most important ones if we want to look at that future. And into that future, we see really different things emerging, like maybe of applied Excel. Who proposed the concept of fractal stories. So in journalism, you have like the very classical storytelling form with, a short paragraph that summarizes the important part of the story and then move on. And, that structure is defined by very old standards and technical limitations like the old press and so forth. And many different news formats have emerged since. But then, so what kind of formats can emerge with AI? And maybe the word format isn't good in itself. Like fractal stories, the idea is like you have stories become like a network of mini apps or mini widgets that can constantly be updated. But then I also really like Mathieu Laurent's idea that content is liquid. So AI can be a tool to repurpose content from one platform to another, from one media to another. But then again, your purpose is really important.
AI is liquid. I like that. Do you think that a personalization plays a role in how we're telling news stories and in journalism, or is that going the wrong path with how we're telling stories?
It's a good question. It definitely can be useful. Like, for example, I believe every newsroom has its own voice and its own, I would say, language level. Like, an article from the New York Times, it's not written in the same, with the same kind of complexity that an article from another kind of news outlet. But the analysis, how can you adapt it to reach a new audience that maybe has more difficulty with the language or, is younger? So that's a form of personalization that can really serve the audience. But the paradox, I believe, there is that one of the function of journalism is, I would say like that, and to build like a common ground, to give us common references so that we can have conversations, right? So that the citizens can make decisions about their own lives. And so maybe there's a danger if like the public space gets to be so fragmented that we don't have like these common pieces, like media artifacts that we can discuss together. But that will be something super interesting to look at in the coming years.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because there's an easy way to see that personalization could be an application, right? I just want to surface certain news stories to me. But this already happens in social media, and it's kind of why we have echo chambers, right? We're only surfaced stories that we want or the algorithm seeks out for us, when in fact maybe we do need to see a broader view of stories and to have that discussion and for everyone to see the same thing. I think is probably a big part of what journalism should be, or at least has played a part in the past. And also learning. I mean, reading a New York Times article or an article in The Economist, and you're struggling with it, it's also some sort of a learning curve. But I can see where technology can enable you to be like, hey, I want this Economist article explain it to me like I'm 5, and you get that served to you as well. But I don't know if that's good or not, but it's certainly possible, right? There's different ways you can go about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to reflect on the role of algorithms themselves, because I think nowadays there's we haven't many options. We don't have many options to choose our algorithms, right? You go on a platform, you just have to deal with that algorithm. But there are a lot of interesting discussions emerging that propose a different organization of information, where maybe the users could get to choose their algorithms, and the content might be able to move more freely, like the Web3 idea, and that could change a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, that was a discussion about TikTok, obviously, and how that would decouple during that discussion. Let's see what happens with that. Yeah, endlessly fascinating. We're running up on time, Chloe. I can spend a lot more time with you, obviously, and hope we can bring it back sometime and see where we are in the future on this journey of the future of human creativity and in the age of intelligence that we're entering. What are your hopes for the future of storytelling and AI? Paint us a picture of the perfect world. How are we solving the climate crisis with using technology and AI? Do you have hopes for the future that we're going to go through this and come out alive?
Yeah, I think the perfect world is imperfect, and maybe we have to make more room for mistakes and for trying things out. And, talking from a media perspective, we have very strict guidelines and guardrails, and we have to be very cautious about the way we use AI, and, for good reasons. But at the same time, we have to make space for mistakes and trying things out. And I believe that's true for the media, for other domains, and for individuals as well. I really enjoyed talking with you today, even though it was really, making me going outside of my comfort zone, because obviously I'm not an English speaker, but I think I would still prefer trying to understand each other, even though I make mistakes, than using a perfect AI solution that would, dub my voice and flatten it. And so for me, an interesting future would be one where we try to go outside of our comfort zone, even though we make mistakes, but learn a lot of things on the way and hopefully learn it together.
Oh, that's beautiful. What an ending, Chloe. I love that. The beauty is in the imperfections. I think that's something to end on. Before we drop off here, what advice do you give to, I'm sure you do this a lot, but what advice do you give to young creatives or young journalists who wants to follow your impressive career path?
Experiment, and please don't try to follow my path. Find your own path, but try. And, when we get back to go back to TikTok briefly, sometimes it's really exciting, but sometimes it's really hard, because you never know when a video will catch traction. And, I have videos that have maybe thousands of views, and some are other several millions. And I remember hearing a creator saying that, the important thing is to learn something when you do a video. What I mean is engaging in conversation. So if you love dialogue, go on and have fun. And I think that's it. Don't look for metrics, look for meaning.
And who knows, maybe you end up on a horse playing music as a career path. Who knows where that will take you. Thank you so much, Chloé. It was a pleasure having you. Where do we find you? What are your handles on social?
Well, obviously, I have a very easy name to remember, right? Sondervorst. Who has trouble spelling that? So yeah, it's just Chloé Sondervorst on TikTok, LinkedIn, and most platforms. Yeah, and on Radio Canada. If you want to listen to French radio, go there. You won't be disappointed.
Amazing. Everyone should do that. I'm going to do that to just brush up on my French, Chloé. That's going to be my New Year's resolution. It's coming up soon. Thank you so much for coming to Makes You Wonder. This has been really, really fun. I am, beaming with sunshine here. So this is the time to drop off. I can barely see anything.
Yeah, and here it's so gray, like there's wind and rain, like the weather totally changed. Yeah, but you're shining through the screen and I really enjoy that conversation. Thank you so much, Oskar. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Chloé. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching and listening to Makes You Wonder. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a solid and hit that subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts. For extra karma, please share with your mom and your friends too. Makes You Wonder is made with love by Wondercraft, the AI audio studio for brands and creative teams. It's hosted by Oskar Sarander. You can find Oskar on LinkedIn, X, and Threads. Links in show notes. This episode was produced by Alex Hughes Morgan. It was edited by Zaina. A nice young man named Dimitri from Wondercraft was the executive producer. Learn more about Wondercraft at wondercraft.ai.